Marcus Chen stared at his bank account balance with the same expression he might reserve for a particularly stubborn math problem. 3 credits. 3 measly credits left after paying for his transport license renewal. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back in the cramped pilot seat of his cargo hauler, watching the stars drift past through the cracked viewport. The Galactic Trade Network bulletin board flickered to life on his console, displaying hundreds of job postings from across the sector. Most required expensive licenses he couldn't afford, or ships much larger than his beat-up freighter. He scrolled through listing after listing, each one a reminder of how far he'd fallen since leaving Earth's military service. Then he saw it. A single line buried deep in the discount section. Remote space station for sale. Kepler 442 system. 1 credit. Immediate transfer upon payment. Marcus blinked. 1 credit? That had to be a mistake. Space stations, even the smallest ones, sold for millions. He clicked on the listing, expecting to find some catch hidden in the fine print. The details were sparse. The station was located in the Kepler 442 system, orbiting the 4th planet. Built by an extinct alien species called the Vorthak, about 200 years ago. No current inhabitants. Structural integrity reportedly sound. Reason for low price. Complete isolation and lack of strategic value. Marcus checked the seller information. Galactic Salvage Consortium. A legitimate company known for selling off abandoned installations. Their reputation was solid, if not particularly generous. If they were selling something for 1 credit, it meant they'd found absolutely no value in it. He hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before clicking Purchase. His account balance dropped to 2 credits. A confirmation message appeared instantly, along with navigation coordinates and a basic station schematic. The transaction was so quick it felt almost anticlimactic. Marcus Chen, former Earth Defense Force pilot, was now the proud owner of a space station he'd never seen, in a system he'd never heard of. The journey to Kepler 442 took 8 days. Marcus used the time to research everything he could about the Vorthak, but information was scarce. They'd been a minor civilization that had vanished around the same time humans first achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was considered primitive by current standards, though reliable. Most of their installations had been scrapped decades ago. When he finally dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates, Marcus had to search for several minutes before spotting the station. It was much smaller than he'd expected, maybe 300 meters across at its widest point. The design was distinctly alien, with smooth curves and organic-looking protrusions that reminded him of deep-sea creatures from Earth's oceans. As his ship approached, automated systems came online. A crackling transmission reached his radio in a language he didn't recognize, followed by a computer-generated human translation. Welcome to Research Station Vorth 7. Please proceed to Docking Bay 3 for quarantine screening. The docking bay doors opened smoothly as he approached. Inside, everything looked surprisingly well-maintained. Emergency lights cast an eerie blue glow over the empty space, and he could see airlocks leading deeper into the station. His ship's sensors detected a breathable atmosphere throughout most of the facility. Marcus suited up anyway. He'd learned not to trust life support systems older than his grandfather. He grabbed his toolkit and emergency supplies, then stepped through the airlock into his new property. The first thing that struck him was the silence. Not the empty quiet of dead space, but something deeper. The station felt like a place where people had lived and worked and laughed, now holding its breath in their absence. His footsteps echoed off the curved walls as he followed the main corridor toward what his schematic indicated was the central hub. The Vorthak had built everything to accommodate beings roughly the same size as humans, though their aesthetic sense was completely different. Instead of straight lines and right angles, everything flowed together organically. Doorways curved like ellipses, walls met floors in gentle arcs. Even the lighting fixtures seemed grown rather than manufactured. The central hub was a large spherical chamber with corridors branching off in all directions. A holographic display in the center showed the station's layout in 3 dimensions. Marcus touched one of the control surfaces, and the display shifted to show power distribution, atmosphere recycling, and other critical systems. Everything appeared to be running normally, though at minimal power levels. He explored methodically, checking each section against his schematic. Living quarters for about 50 beings, arranged in small clusters that suggested family units. A medical bay with equipment he couldn't identify. Food production areas that looked like they'd been designed for hydroponic farming. Everything was clean and organized, as if the inhabitants had left expecting to return. The most impressive section was the research laboratory complex. 5 interconnected chambers filled with equipment that looked decades ahead of anything Marcus had seen before. Molecular scanners that could analyze substances down to the atomic level. Fabrication units that appeared capable of building complex devices from raw materials. Computer systems with interfaces he couldn't even begin to understand. In the central lab, he found something that made him stop and stare. A massive circular platform surrounded by field generators and monitoring equipment. The platform itself was empty except for a single object sitting in the center. A small device about the size of a briefcase. Made of a material that seemed to shift color as he looked at it. Marcus approached carefully. The device looked important, sitting there like a jewel in an elaborate setting. Warning signs in Vorthak script surrounded the platform, though the translation system seemed to have trouble with them. The closest interpretation was something like, caution, probability cascade in progress, or possibly danger, reality fluctuation active. Before he could examine the device more closely, his suit's communication system crackled to life. An incoming transmission from somewhere in the sector. Unknown vessel. This is Captain Sarah Martinez of the UES Harmony. Please respond immediately. Marcus frowned. He wasn't expecting company, and he'd specifically chosen this isolated system to avoid encounters with other ships. This is Marcus Chen aboard cargo vessel Morning Star. What can I do for you, Captain? Mr. Chen. Our long-range sensors detected your arrival at the Vorthak station. We need to inform you that this facility is under quarantine by order of the Galactic Health Organization. You need to evacuate immediately. That was news to Marcus. The Galactic Salvage Consortium had said nothing about any quarantine when they sold him the station. I'm sorry, Captain, but I have legal ownership papers for this station. Purchased it from Galactic Salvage Consortium 8 days ago. There was a long pause. When Captain Martinez responded, her voice had a different tone. Mr. Chen, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That station was quarantined not because of biological hazards, but because of what the Vorthak were researching there. The experiments they were conducting were deemed too dangerous to continue. Marcus looked around the pristine laboratory, then back at the strange device on the platform. What kind of experiments? Temporal mechanics. Specifically, they were trying to create localized time distortions for faster-than-light communication. Their last transmission to the Galactic Research Council mentioned achieving some kind of breakthrough right before all contact was lost. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Temporal mechanics was heavily regulated by galactic law. Most civilizations had learned the hard way that playing with time led to catastrophic consequences. The few species that had achieved stable time manipulation kept their methods extremely secret. Captain, if this research was so dangerous, why was the station put up for sale? Another pause. According to our records, it wasn't supposed to be. Someone at Galactic Salvage made a significant error. Mr. Chen, I strongly recommend you exit the station and await our arrival. We have specialists on board who can properly secure the facility. Marcus looked at the device again. It didn't look particularly dangerous, just sitting there quietly. But then again, the most dangerous things often didn't. He'd learned that lesson in the military. How long until you arrive, Captain? Approximately 6 hours. Can you hold your position until then? I'll consider it, Marcus said, though he had no intention of leaving just yet. He'd spent his last credit on this station, and he wanted to understand what he'd bought before handing it over to someone else. After ending the transmission, Marcus spent the next hour exploring the rest of the station. He found personal quarters that told stories of lives interrupted, family photos of beings that looked like tall, graceful humanoids with large eyes and delicate features, children's toys that seemed to respond to touch with gentle musical notes. a library filled with crystals that projected text and images when activated. In what appeared to be the station commander's office, he found a series of log entries recorded in the final days before the evacuation. The translation system worked better with official records, giving him a clearer picture of what had happened. The Vorthak research team had been working on something they called a temporal anchor, a device that could create stable reference points in time and space. Their goal was to enable instantaneous communication across galactic distances by sending messages backward and forward through these anchored points. The early experiments had been promising. They'd managed to create small temporal distortions that lasted only microseconds. But then something had changed. The final log entries spoke of unexpected side effects, time flowing differently in various parts of the station, objects aging rapidly or not at all, team members experiencing precognitive flashes. The last entry was from the station commander, a being named Vorth Ka Tem. The translation was fragmented, but the urgency was clear. Temporal cascade, expanding beyond containment. Evacuation order, effective immediately. May the ancestors forgive us for what we have awakened. Marcus returned to the laboratory, studying the device with new understanding. If the Vorthak had actually succeeded in creating stable temporal distortions, the implications were staggering. Such technology could revolutionize everything from space travel to manufacturing to scientific research. But it could also destroy entire star systems if it went wrong. He activated one of the monitoring stations surrounding the platform. The displays lit up with data streams that meant nothing to him. But the patterns were clearly active. Whatever the device was doing, it was still running after 200 years. As he studied the readouts, Marcus began to notice something odd. The timestamps on the data were inconsistent. Some readings showed the current date, but others displayed dates from years in the past, or even further in the future. The device wasn't just creating temporal distortions. It was somehow experiencing multiple time streams simultaneously. His suit's proximity sensors suddenly activated, warning him of an approaching vessel. But, according to his calculations, Captain Martinez shouldn't arrive for another 4 hours. Marcus checked his own chronometer and felt a moment of vertigo. According to the display, he'd been in the laboratory for 6 hours, but it felt like he'd only been there for 1. The temporal distortions were affecting more than just the device. They were affecting everything in the laboratory, including him. Marcus backed away from the platform, his mind racing. He needed to get off the station. But first, he had to understand what he was dealing with. If he left now, this technology would fall into the hands of people who might not appreciate its significance or its dangers. He opened a secure communication channel to his ship's computer and began uploading all the data he could access from the Vorthak systems. Whatever happened next, he wanted a complete record of what he'd found. As the upload progressed, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. The choice he made in the next few minutes would determine not just his own future, but potentially the future of human civilization itself. The device pulsed once, a barely perceptible change in its coloration. And for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he heard voices. The excited chatter of scientists making a discovery that would change everything. Marcus pressed his hand against the console and felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity mixed with something else entirely. The Vorthak interface responded to his touch, and suddenly the laboratory filled with holographic displays showing complex equations and three-dimensional models of space-time itself. The mathematics were beyond anything he'd learned in his engineering courses, but the visual representations told a story he could understand. The device wasn't just manipulating time. It was creating what the Vorthak called probability channels, pathways through which information could flow across different potential timelines. As he watched the displays, Marcus began to comprehend the true scope of what he was looking at. This wasn't just faster-than-light communication. This was a window into alternate realities, a way to see not just what was, but what could be. His ship's sensors detected another vessel approaching, moving fast. Marcus checked the readings and realized this wasn't Captain Martinez's ship. The energy signature was completely different. This vessel was much larger, and it was using some kind of cloaking technology that made it nearly invisible to conventional scanners. A new voice crackled through his communicator, speaking with a distinctly non-human accent. "Human vessel. You will evacuate the research station immediately. This facility contains property of the hegemony. The hegemony. Marcus had heard that name whispered in the darker corners of galactic politics. A coalition of advanced alien species that controlled vast territories on the far side of the galaxy. They rarely ventured into what they considered the primitive sectors where humans operated. But when they did, it was usually to claim something they considered rightfully theirs. "This station is legally owned," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have documentation proving purchase through proper channels. Documentation issued by species we do not recognize as having authority over Vorthak technology. You have 10 minutes to comply." Quote, the transmission ended abruptly, leaving Marcus alone with the humming of the station's systems and the growing certainty that he was in way over his head. He looked at the temporal device again, and this time he noticed something he'd missed before. Etched into the base were symbols that looked almost like mathematical formulas, but arranged in patterns that suggested they might be coordinates. Acting on impulse, Marcus activated his suit's scanner and aimed it at the symbols. The results made his blood run cold. The coordinates weren't for locations in normal space. They were temporal coordinates, pointing to specific moments in time across multiple timelines. One set of coordinates was labeled in Vorthak script. The translation system rendered it as Origin Point, Human Emergence. Another set was labeled Convergence Event, Probability Storm. A third simply said, The Choice, Timeline, Collapse. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled atmosphere. The Vorthak hadn't just been experimenting with time travel. They'd been mapping critical decision points across the development of galactic civilization, including the moment humans first achieved faster-than-light travel. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If this technology fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to alter the course of history itself. Entire species could be prevented from evolving. Wars could be won before they were fought. The natural development of galactic civilization could be derailed by anyone with the knowledge and power to manipulate these temporal anchor points. His communicator buzzed with an incoming transmission from Captain Martinez. "Mr. Chen, we're detecting another vessel in the system. Large, heavily armed, and using stealth technology. Are you reading this?" "I see it, Captain. They've ordered me to evacuate, claiming the station belongs to something called the hegemony." There was a sharp intake of breath from Captain Martinez. "Mr. Chen, you need to listen to me very carefully. The hegemony are not the sort of beings you want to negotiate with. They view most younger species as little more than useful resources. If they want that technology, they'll take it regardless of any legal claims you might have. What exactly do they want with Vorthak time manipulation research?" According to intelligence reports we've received, the hegemony has been searching for Vorthak temporal technology for over a century. There are rumors they've been trying to develop their own version but haven't been able to achieve stable results. If they get their hands on a working prototype, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus could imagine what would happen if beings who already considered themselves superior to most of galactic civilization gained the ability to manipulate time itself. "Captain, how long until you reach the station?" 20 minutes at maximum burn." "But Mr. Chen, if that hegemony ship has the firepower our sensors suggest, there may not be much we can do to help you." Marcus closed the channel and turned back to the temporal device. 20 minutes wasn't enough time to understand the technology completely, but it might be enough to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. He began working with the Vorthak interface, trying to access deeper levels of the system. The holographic displays shifted and changed as he navigated through layers of programming that seemed to respond more to intuition than logical commands. The Vorthak had built their computers to work with conscious intent rather than simple input commands. As he worked, Marcus began to understand why the original research team had been forced to evacuate. The device wasn't just mapping temporal coordinates. It was actively scanning multiple timelines simultaneously, creating a growing database of critical decision points throughout galactic history. The more it scanned, the more unstable local space-time became. But there was something else. Hidden deep in the system files, he found records of experiments the Vorthak had conducted in their final days. They hadn't just been mapping temporal anchor points. They'd been testing whether those points could be altered. The results were terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. In one timeline, the Vorthak had prevented a plague that would have wiped out billions of beings across 12 star systems. In another, they'd stopped a war before it could start by providing early warning of an attack. But in a third timeline, their intervention had led to the complete collapse of local space-time, erasing an entire sector from existence. The Vorthak had realized they were playing with forces beyond their comprehension. But by then it was too late. The temporal distortions they'd created were spreading, threatening to tear apart the fabric of reality itself. Their only option had been to abandon the station and hope the effects would stabilize on their own. But the effects hadn't stabilized. According to the data Marcus was reading, they'd been growing stronger over the past 200 years. The device was now powerful enough to reach temporal anchor points anywhere in the galaxy, and it was getting stronger every day. A proximity alarm sounded throughout the station. The hegemony ship was approaching fast, and Marcus could see weapon ports opening along its hull. Whatever they planned to do, they weren't interested in preserving the station intact. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of trying to flee or hide, he activated the station's communication array and broadcast on all frequencies. Attention all vessels and monitoring stations in this sector. My name is Marcus Chen, former Earth Defense Force pilot, current owner of Vorthak Research Station designation, Vorthka-7. I am hereby making public the existence of functional temporal manipulation technology located at these coordinates. He transmitted everything. The station's location, the research data he'd recovered, detailed scans of the temporal device, and most importantly, the coordinates of the critical temporal anchor points the Vorthak had mapped. This technology represents both the greatest opportunity and the greatest threat our civilization has ever encountered. It cannot be allowed to fall under the control of any single faction or species. I am therefore declaring this station a neutral research facility, open to all civilizations committed to the peaceful development of temporal science. The response was immediate. His communicator exploded with incoming transmissions from dozens of ships throughout the sector. News of temporal manipulation technology spread through the galactic communication networks like wildfire. Within minutes, vessels representing a dozen different species were altering course toward the Kepler 442 system. The hegemony ship halted its approach, apparently reconsidering their options now that the entire galaxy was watching. Captain Martinez's voice cut through the chatter. Mr. Chen, that was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. You've just started what could become the largest gathering of military vessels in this sector's history. Marcus looked at the temporal device, still pulsing quietly with its impossible energies. Captain, I think that might have been the point. The Vorthak were right to be afraid of this technology, but hiding it hasn't made the problem go away. Maybe it's time for all of us to work together to figure out how to use it responsibly. And if we can't? If the technology proves too dangerous to control? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The Vorthak research files contained protocols for shutting down the device permanently, but they came with warnings he was still trying to understand. Destroying the temporal anchor points might prevent future manipulation, but it could also lock the current timeline in place permanently, preventing any natural evolution or change. Then we'll have to make some very difficult decisions, Marcus said. But at least we'll make them together. As more ships continued to arrive in the system, Marcus realized he'd fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. No longer could any single faction claim exclusive access to temporal technology. The knowledge was now public, the location known to everyone. But knowledge and wisdom were two different things. The real challenge would be figuring out how to use this incredible power without destroying themselves in the process. The temporal device pulsed again, brighter this time, and for a moment Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if he were seeing himself from outside, standing at the center of events that would reshape the future of galactic civilization. He had the unsettling feeling that somewhere, in another timeline, another version of himself was making different choices, leading to very different outcomes. The question was, which timeline would prove to be the real one? On his scanner, Marcus counted 47 ships, now converging on the station, representing every major faction in the local cluster. human vessels, Altarian science ships, Centaurian diplomacy cruisers, and species he couldn't even identify. All of them drawn by the promise of technology that could change everything. He opened a channel to the entire gathering fleet. "This is Marcus Chen, aboard Research Station Vorthka 7. I propose we establish a joint research council to study the temporal manipulation device. Each participating species will contribute scientific personnel and resources, and all discoveries will be shared equally. The goal will be to understand the technology well enough to use it safely, or if necessary, to neutralize it permanently." The responses came from dozens of different voices, speaking dozens of different languages, but the message was clear. They were all willing to try. As Marcus prepared to welcome the first diplomatic teams aboard his station, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what the Vorthok had hoped would happen. Maybe their evacuation hadn't been a failure after all. Maybe it had been the first step in a plan that had taken 200 years to come to fruition. The temporal device pulsed once more, and this time, Marcus was certain he heard something in its harmonics. The echo of voices from the past, speaking words he couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. The choice has been made. The timeline holds. The future begins now. The next 72 hours transformed the quiet Kepler 442 system into the most important location in the galaxy. Ships continued to arrive by the hour, creating a floating city around the small Vorthak station. Emergency docking platforms were constructed using modular components contributed by various fleets. Translation systems worked overtime, as species that had never directly communicated before attempted to establish diplomatic protocols. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, somehow becoming the unofficial coordinator of the largest interspecies scientific collaboration in galactic history. His one-credit investment had become the foundation for something unprecedented. The first major breakthrough came from Dr. Zethara, a crystalline being from the Altarian collective, whose species communicated through harmonic resonance. She was examining the temporal device when she noticed something that had escaped everyone else's attention. "The device is not functioning as originally designed," she announced during the morning briefing, her words creating musical tones that the translators rendered into various languages. The Vorthak built it to be operated by multiple consciousness simultaneously. It requires collaborative thought patterns to achieve stable temporal anchoring. This revelation changed everything. The Vorthak hadn't abandoned the station because the technology was too dangerous. They'd been forced to leave because their population was too small to operate the device safely. The temporal distortions that had driven them away weren't side effects of the technology running wild. They were the result of insufficient mental coordination. Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead researcher from the human delegation, pulled up the original Vorthak research notes. "Look at this. In their early experiments, they used teams of 12 to 15 researchers working in mental synchronization. But as their population declined due to the plague that hit their homeworld, they had to make do with smaller and smaller teams. And smaller teams meant less stable temporal anchors," added Commander Vex Thin of the Centaurian Science Corps. "Which explains why the distortions grew worse over time instead of better." Marcus studied the readouts from the device, finally understanding what he was seeing. "So what you're saying is that this technology isn't just safe when used properly. It actually requires cooperation between multiple species to function at full capacity." "Precisely," Dr. Zethara replied. "The Vorthak designed it that way intentionally. They believed that power over time itself was too great for any single species to wield alone. The implications were staggering. The most powerful technology in galactic history could only be operated through unprecedented levels of interspecies cooperation. It was as if the Vorthak had built cooperation itself into the fundamental structure of the device. Over the following weeks, representatives from 43 different species worked together to establish the Temporal Research Consortium. Each member contributed their unique perspectives and capabilities to understanding the device. The crystalline Altarians provided harmonic analysis. The gas giant dwelling Jovians contributed their expertise in multi-dimensional physics. The machine intelligences of the synthetic collective offered computational power beyond anything biological minds could achieve. And humans? Humans brought something unexpected: a talent for improvisation and creative problem-solving that consistently surprised the other species. Marcus discovered this during the first attempt to fully activate the temporal device. The carefully planned activation sequence, developed through weeks of collaborative research, failed to achieve stable resonance. The other species were ready to spend months recalculating their approach. But Marcus had a different idea. What if we're overthinking this? He suggested during the crisis meeting. The Vorthak weren't just scientists, they were explorers, dreamers. Maybe the device responds to something more than just technical knowledge. Despite protests from several of the more conservative delegations, Marcus convinced the consortium to try an unscripted activation. Instead of following predetermined procedures, the research team would simply focus their collective intent on creating a stable temporal anchor and let the device respond to their combined will. It worked. The temporal distortions that had plagued the station for centuries stabilized into clean, controllable channels. For the first time in 200 years, the device operated exactly as the Vorthak had intended. The first coordinated temporal observation was breathtaking. The consortium chose to observe the moment when the Vorthak first activated their device, hoping to understand the original researchers' intentions. What they saw changed everything they thought they knew about galactic history. The Vorthak research team hadn't been working alone. In the vision transmitted through the temporal anchor, they could see representatives from dozens of species standing around the device, beings that shouldn't have met for centuries, according to conventional historical records. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Kim. "According to our histories, first contact between the Vorthak and the Altarians didn't happen until 50 years after this temporal research began. But the evidence was clear. The Vorthak had been using early versions of their temporal technology to facilitate contact between species across vast distances, sharing knowledge and resources to accelerate the development of galactic civilization. What historians had recorded as separate evolutionary paths had actually been a carefully coordinated effort, spanning multiple star systems and time periods. The revelation rewritten everything they thought they knew about how galactic civilization had developed. The apparent randomness of which species achieved faster than light travel when they did, the curious similarities in basic technologies across species that had evolved on opposite sides of the galaxy, the remarkable lack of major interstellar wars. All of it had been carefully guided by temporal manipulation. Technology operated through unprecedented interspecies cooperation. Marcus felt a growing sense of awe as the implications sank in. They were building something. All of them. Working together across time and space. Building towards something specific. But what? Asked Commander Vex Thin. What could require that level of coordination? The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the station's archives, the research team discovered files that had been locked behind temporal encryption. Data that could only be accessed when the device was operating at full capacity, with multiple species working in harmony. The files contained a message from the original Vorthak research team, recorded moments before they evacuated the station. But it wasn't just from the Vorthak. Species after species appeared in the recording, each adding their own piece to a collective message that spanned centuries of careful preparation. "If you are viewing this message," the combined voices said, "then you have achieved what we could not, true cooperation across species boundaries. The technology you now control is not a weapon or a tool for dominance. It is a bridge between timelines, designed to ensure that the path forward leads to wisdom rather than destruction." The message revealed that galactic civilization stood at a critical juncture. According to their calculations, the next century would determine whether the galaxy evolved toward a peaceful confederation of species working together or collapsed into resource wars that would destroy most advanced life in the local cluster. "We have seen both futures," the voices continued. "In one timeline, cooperation leads to an age of unprecedented discovery and growth. In another, competition leads to extinction. The choice between these futures rests with the generation that learns to operate this device together. You are that generation." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, shared by every being in the consortium. They weren't just studying ancient technology. They were actively choosing the future of galactic civilization. The final part of the message was addressed specifically to humans, though it had been recorded centuries before Earth achieved faster-than-light travel. To the species that will find this station and make the choice to share rather than hoard, to cooperate rather than compete, you carry within your nature something essential to the future we hope to build. Your tendency to see possibilities where others see only problems, to improvise solutions where others see only barriers, to choose hope where others choose fear. These traits will guide the galaxy toward the timeline where all species thrive. Marcus looked around the research chamber at beings from 43 different worlds, all working together toward a common goal. Representatives of ancient civilizations and young species like humanity, biological and synthetic intelligences, beings of matter and energy, and consciousness itself, all united by the understanding that their cooperation was literally shaping the future. 6 months after his 1-credit purchase, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Temporal Research Institute, watching as the latest team prepared for another coordinated observation. The institute now hosted permanent research stations for over 60 species, making it the largest peaceful gathering in galactic history. The temporal device had been successfully used to prevent 3 potential conflicts, facilitate the rapid development of life-saving medical technology, and establish communication links between isolated worlds. Each use required consensus among all participating species, ensuring that temporal manipulation remained a tool for collective benefit rather than individual advantage. Captain Martinez, now the military liaison for the Institute, joined Marcus at the observation window. "Any regrets about spending your last credit?" Marcus laughed, remembering the desperate pilot who had bought a space station because it was all he could afford. "I think it was the best investment in galactic history." Below them, the research teams were preparing for their most ambitious project yet, using the temporal anchors to facilitate the development of faster-than-light travel for species that hadn't yet achieved it naturally, not to interfere with their natural development, but to accelerate it in ways that would allow them to join the galactic community as full partners, rather than struggling to catch up. It was a human idea, born from humanity's own recent experience joining galactic civilization. The proposal had been controversial at first, but the consortium had eventually agreed. The future they were building would be stronger if it included as many voices as possible. As the temporal device powered up for the new mission, Marcus felt the familiar tingle of temporal distortion washing over the station. For a moment, he could sense the vast web of interconnected timelines spreading out in all directions, past and future, possibility and reality, all connected by the choices made in the present moment. He thought about the path that had led him here. A broke pilot spending his last credit on what seemed like worthless real estate, discovering technology beyond imagination, choosing to share rather than profit, helping to create something that would benefit the entire galaxy. Looking back, it seemed almost inevitable. But Marcus knew better. Every choice along the way could have led to different outcomes. A more selfish person might have tried to keep the technology secret. A more cautious person might have hidden from the responsibility. A more aggressive species might have used temporal manipulation as a weapon. But humans, it turned out, had a talent for making the choices that led toward hope rather than fear, cooperation rather than competition. It was a talent that served them well in a galaxy where the future itself depended on working together. The temporal device completed its activation sequence, and the research teams began their work. Somewhere in the galaxy, a young species was about to take their first steps toward the stars, guided by the wisdom of civilizations they had never met but who cared about their future nonetheless. Marcus smiled and headed back to his office. He had reports to file, budgets to approve, and a dozen different crisis situations to mediate. The work of building a better future never seemed to end. But for once in his life, he was exactly where he belonged.